Lila Bennett never expected that a set of maternity photos meant to capture the most intimate and joyful chapter of her life would be turned into a public spectacle. Yet there they were, splashed across her ex-husband's social media feed, accompanied by captions so cruel they sliced through her like broken glass. "Guess she finally found someone desperate enough," one post read. "Baby wait before the baby's even born," said another. The words weren't just from strangers. They were shared, liked, and commented on by people she'd once considered family. But the worst part, the man who started it all, Ethan, her ex-husband, was the father of the child she was carrying. It wasn't just a joke to him. It was revenge disguised as humor. They'd been divorced for only 6 months, and he'd wasted no time flaunting his new girlfriend on every platform possible. But now he had crossed an unforgivable line. He had taken something sacred and turned it into ammunition. Lila sat at her small kitchen table, staring at the screen of her phone until the images blurred. The soft hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the apartment. She wasn't someone who cried easily, not after surviving a messy divorce, losing her job in the same month, and learning she was pregnant while alone. But now the tears came, hot and unrelenting. Her best friend Carla was the first to call. "Don't look at it," Carla urged. "Block him. Delete your accounts. Just don't give him the satisfaction." But Lila couldn't. She read every single comment, each one chiseling away at her dignity. The world didn't know their story. They didn't know that Lila had been there when Ethan's business was nothing more than an idea scribbled on a napkin. They didn't know that she'd spent 5 years building him up, working 2 jobs so he could focus on his startup. And they certainly didn't know that when his company finally took off, he traded her in for a woman 10 years younger. Ethan's new girlfriend, Tiffany, was everything Lila wasn't: blonde, petite, and obsessed with curated Instagram posts that showcased their perfect life. And now, Tiffany was part of the mockery too, leaving laughing emojis under the cruelest comments. Lila wanted to scream, to fight back, to tell the world what really happened. But what good would that do? They just twisted against her. She could hear Ethan's voice in her head. "You always overreact, Lila." She put her phone down and pressed her palms into her eyes, willing herself to breathe. She wasn't just protecting her own pride anymore. There was a life inside her, and that life deserved a mother who didn't break under the weight of someone else's cruelty. And yet, something inside her shifted that night. The humiliation, the anger, the betrayal, they didn't just hurt, they burned. And from that burn came a quiet, dangerous resolve. She wasn't going to beg him to stop. She wasn't going to hide. She was going to answer him in a way the entire city would see. And when she did, Ethan Bennett would wish he'd never opened his mouth. By morning, the storm online had turned into a flood. Ethan's posts were now being stitched into short videos, strangers laughing over music, pointing at her belly like it was a punchline. Lila kept the curtains drawn. She made oatmeal she didn't eat, and sat at the table with both hands around a mug that had gone cold. Carla showed up without asking, dropping a paper bag of bagels and a hug that lasted a little too long. "You don't deserve this," she said. "None of it." "I won't beg him to take it down," Lila answered. "If I fight on his terms, he wins twice." Carla glanced at the framed prints from Lila's maternity shoot lined along the wall. "They're beautiful," she said. "Simple, honest, that's the part he can't stand." They talked about options: a lawyer, a statement, reporting the posts. Each idea sounded small next to the size of the damage. Lila shook her head. "It has to be something that makes him stop and think before he opens his mouth again." They went for a walk because the apartment felt like a box. On the corner, a giant billboard floated above traffic. Some perfume brand, a woman in a silk dress under the words "Own Your Story." Lila stared at it for a long time. Carla followed her eyes. "You're not thinking." "Why not?" Lila said quietly. "He made me public to humiliate me. I'll be public to tell the truth." Carla winced. "Billboards cost a fortune." "Maybe not all of them," a calm voice said behind them. They turned. The man looked familiar, though Lila couldn't place him at first. Early 40s, kind eyes, the sort of presence that made room go still. He held a small terrier on a leash and wore a baseball cap like any other neighbor. "You're Lila Bennett," he said, not a question. "You painted the pediatric wing mural at St. Luke's 3 years ago. My mother loved it. She sat under it during chemo. I never forgot your name. Memory clicked into place. Mr. Croft? She asked. He nodded. Julian. Carla's mouth fell open. Croft? As in? Julian raised a hand, gentle. Just Julian, please. He glanced up at the billboard. You want one of those? I want my dignity back, Leela said. And I want him to stop thinking women are furniture he can move around. Julian studied her face, the steadiness in it. Good answer. He tapped his phone. I know the company that owns most of the digital boards between Midtown and the West Side. If we move fast, we can play something by tomorrow at dawn. Lila folded her arms. I'm not a charity case. Then don't be, Julian said. Let it be a trade. My foundation is building a new arts program for kids coming out of treatment. We need someone to lead it for a year. You take the job. I'll underwrite the board as project promotion. Carla squeezed Lila's arm. This is real, Lee. Lila looked at Julian. One more thing, he added, voice softer. The internet is cruel. If you stand alone on that board, they'll try to break you again. If you stand with someone, they'll have to think twice. With who? Me, Julian said simply. No scandal, no gossip. We present it clean. A mother choosing joy, a community standing with her. I'll take the heat that should never have been yours. Lila's first instinct was to refuse. Then she remembered Ethan's captions, the echo of strangers' laughter. She remembered the baby's tiny kick last night, the promise tucked under her heart. She nodded once. We do it with taste. No digs, no mud. Julian smiled. Class over noise. Agreed. They shot the photo that evening in natural light, on the hospital roof where her mural still glowed. Lila wore a simple blue dress and held her belly with quiet pride. Julian stood beside her, not touching, just present, like a guardrail on a high bridge. The photographer, an old friend of Julian's, worked quickly and spoke softly. When they finished, the sun had fallen behind the skyline, and the city lights looked like 1,000 small prayers. At home, Lila brewed tea and waited. Her inbox chimed. A proof arrived, her image on a 60-foot digital board over West 34th Street. Not loud, not flashy, clear, strong. The copy read, Lila, mother, artist, hope. Underneath, Community Arts Fund, launching tomorrow. Her phone vibrated again. Ethan. Then again. And again. She let it ring. She turned the volume down and placed the phone face down on the table. She walked to the window and opened the curtain. The city breathed back at her. Horns, voices, the steady pulse of a place that had swallowed bigger stories than hers and kept moving. Lila rested her palm on her belly and spoke softly. Almost a promise. We're gonna be okay. At sunrise, the whole city will see her standing beside a man the internet will call her billionaire fiancé. And Ethan will finally realize the joke isn't on her anymore. Before the billboard, before the whispers of Billionaire's fiancé started floating through Manhattan cocktail parties, Lila Bennett was just Leela. At 28, she wasn't the kind of woman who commanded attention when she walked into a room. Not because she lacked beauty, she had plenty of it, but because she carried it quietly, almost without realizing. Her eyes were the deep, warm brown of fresh coffee, framed by naturally long lashes. Her dark hair, often twisted into a messy bun with a pencil jammed through it, smelled faintly of lavender shampoo. Her skin held a soft glow from hours spent painting near windows, soaking in what little sunlight the city offered. She lived in a rent-controlled one-bedroom on the 4th floor of a creaky brick walk-up in Brooklyn. The building always smelled faintly of the pizza place downstairs, and the hallway light had been flickering for as long as she'd been there. The apartment wasn't much, just enough room for a small bed, a thrifted couch, and a kitchen so narrow you had to turn sideways to open the fridge, but she had made it hers. The walls bloomed with her own paintings, sunsets over rooftops, wildflowers spilling from mason jars, portraits of strangers she'd passed on the street and never seen again. Lila had been an artist as long as she could remember, though the word artist still felt too big in her mouth. She'd sold a few pieces over the years, enough to cover rent during dry months, but most of her income had come from freelance illustration jobs, school murals, and odd creative gigs. Her parents had raised her in a small town upstate, the kind of place where everyone knew the sound of each other's cars and secrets didn't stay secret for long. Her father, a mechanic, taught her patience by having her hold the flashlight during long winter nights in the garage. Her mother, a seamstress, taught her the value of detail, how a stitch too loose or a seam slightly crooked could ruin an entire dress. From them, Lila inherited two things: stubbornness and pride in doing things well, even if no one noticed. Meeting Ethan had felt at the time like the universe stepping in. She'd been 22, just out of college with a portfolio she didn't know how to use. He was 27, freshly unemployed after quitting a job he hated, full of grand ideas about starting his own business. They met at a friend's rooftop barbecue. He'd made her laugh with an impression of their host, and she'd offered to help him design a logo for his first project. One project became another, and then another. Soon she was designing his branding, his pitch decks, even helping with client proposals. He was charming, ambitious, and convinced they were a team against the world. In the beginning, she believed it. They married 2 years later in a tiny ceremony under the oak trees at her parents' house. The first years weren't easy. Money was tight, but they made it work. She picked up extra work painting storefront signs and illustrating children's books, while he took meetings with investors. She believed in his dreams so much that she poured her savings into it without hesitation. And when the company finally took off, she thought the struggle had been worth it. But success changed Ethan. At first it was subtle: longer hours, more business trips, fewer shared dinners. Then came the new clothes, the upgraded car, the invitations to networking events she wasn't welcome to attend. Lila told herself it was just part of growth, that they were still the same team. Until the night she found the text messages. They weren't explicit at first, just inside jokes and late-night check-ins from someone named T, but the tone was unmistakable. A few weeks later, he told her about Tiffany, as casually as if he were discussing the weather. He said the marriage wasn't working for him anymore, like it was a business deal that had run its course. By the time she realized the man she'd built a life with was gone, she was already carrying the child they'd planned for years. The pregnancy should have been a celebration, a long-awaited chapter after years of maybe next year conversations. Instead, it became the silent reason she kept moving forward. She didn't tell Ethan right away. Something in her knew that the man he'd become wouldn't see it as a gift, but as an inconvenience. When she finally did tell him, his reaction confirmed it. No joy, no awe, just a measured nod and a quick, "Well, we'll figure something out." The words landed like stones in her chest. She moved out 2 weeks later, packing what she could into cardboard boxes and leaving the rest behind. Her attorney advised her to fight for the apartment and a share of the company she'd helped build, but Lila didn't have the energy for a drawn-out battle. She wanted peace, not war, at least at the time. In her new life, she kept things small and quiet. She took on mural projects for local businesses, the kind of work that let her set her own schedule and avoid the sharp edges of corporate culture. Her days were measured in brushstrokes and cups of tea, punctuated by doctor's appointments and the occasional phone call from her mother checking in. Carla became her anchor. They'd been friends since college, bound together by bad art school critiques and late-night coffee binges. Carla had seen her through heartbreaks, creative slumps, and now the slow unspooling of her marriage. She was the one who insisted Lila keep her maternity shoot appointment, even when Lila argued it felt silly to pose for photos alone. "You're not alone," Carla had said. "You've got that baby, and you've got me. We're doing this." The shoot had been simple: a rented studio with soft lighting, a few changes of clothes, and a photographer who spoke in gentle, encouraging tones. For a few hours, Lila felt almost normal, beautiful even. She didn't know those images would later be twisted into something cruel. But cruelty was a language Ethan had learned fluently. The man who once brought her coffee in bed now brought strangers into their private moments, turning them into jokes for likes and shares. Still, Lila wasn't the type to go on rants online. She didn't post cryptic quotes or air dirty laundry. She preferred to keep her dignity, even if it meant swallowing her hurt in silence. But the billboard idea, that was different. That wasn't about pettiness. It was about reclaiming the narrative, taking back what was hers in a way that couldn't be misinterpreted. Julian Croft's offer came at the right time, but it wasn't charity that made her say yes. It was the way he'd listened without interruption, the way he'd looked at her like she wasn't broken, just bruised. And maybe, just maybe, It was the fact that standing next to someone the public respected might shield her from the worst of the backlash. That night, after signing the paperwork for the arts program job, she lay awake in bed with the proof of the billboard glowing on her phone screen. She imagined the faces of the people who'd laughed at her online, seeing it for the first time. She imagined Ethan's expression, tight, calculating, scrambling for control he no longer had. For the first time in months, she smiled in the dark. Because tomorrow, the city wouldn't just see her pain, they'd see her power. New York had always been a city of contradictions for Lila. Loud but lonely, beautiful but unkind. She'd moved there at 21 with a duffel bag, a sketchbook, and just enough savings to make it through 3 months. Over the years, the city had given her inspiration, heartbreak, and a kind of resilience she never would have found anywhere else. Her Brooklyn neighborhood was far from glamorous. The sidewalks were cracked, the subway entrance smelled faintly of damp concrete, and the corner store owner always looked suspicious if you paid with large bills. But it was hers. She knew the sound of her upstairs neighbor's shoes, the bark of the terrier 2 doors down, and the creak of the second stair leading to her apartment. On weekdays, she'd work from her makeshift studio, a corner of her living room where an easel stood beside a paint-splattered table. From her window, she could see the rooftops, and on clear days, the faint silhouette of the Manhattan skyline. It was enough of a view to remind her she was part of something bigger, even if her life felt small. Before the billboard idea, her world had been reduced to simple routines: morning tea, painting, lunch while watching old movies, an afternoon walk if she had the energy. She'd pass families in the park and catch herself imagining what her life would look like once the baby arrived. Some days that thought warmed her. Other days it felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, staring into fog. The hospital where her prenatal appointments were held sat in the Upper West Side, nearly an hour's train ride away. She didn't mind the trip. It gave her time to sketch the strangers she saw along the way. A man dozing with a bouquet in his lap, a teenager practicing lines from a play, an elderly woman knitting without ever looking down. It was on one of those trips that she first saw Julian Croft in person, months before they spoke. He was stepping out of a black SUV in front of the hospital, holding the door for an older woman with a scarf tied neatly around her head. He didn't notice Lila, but she remembered the way he kept his hand on the woman's elbow, steady and sure as they walked inside. Julian's world was nothing like hers. He lived in a penthouse overlooking Central Park, sat on boards of arts and health foundations, and was photographed at charity galas in tailored suits. But unlike most wealthy men she'd encountered through Ethan's business events, he didn't radiate arrogance. There was something grounded about him, like he knew the difference between power and kindness. The Upper West Side itself felt like a different planet from her Brooklyn block. Wide, tree-lined streets, pre-war buildings with doormen, cafes that sold cappuccinos for the price of her weekly grocery bill. She'd sometimes linger there after appointments, wandering into bookstores or sitting on a bench just to watch the people pass by. This contrast between the quiet corners of her life and the glittering stage of the city was about to collapse into a single moment. The billboard, once it went up, would bridge those worlds. Everyone, from her Brooklyn neighbors to the socialites of Midtown, would see the same image: Lila standing tall, unashamed, reclaiming her own name. And yet, even as the idea took shape, the city carried on around her as if nothing were about to change. Buses roared, street vendors called out deals on hot dogs, couples argued under streetlights. It was humbling and strange to feel on the verge of something life-altering while the rest of the world kept moving. But somewhere in that restless city, Ethan was still smiling, completely unaware that the ground beneath him was about to shift. The week leading up to the billboard launch became a strange kind of limbo for Lila. She still went through her routines, painting, tea, walks, but each moment felt like holding her breath. Carla kept checking in, half excited, half worried about what might happen once the image went public. "You know he's going to call you the second he sees it," Carla said one afternoon as they sat in Lila's kitchen. "I know," Lila replied, slicing an apple. "I'm counting on it." The placement Julian had secured was more than strategic. It was brutal in its precision. The main digital billboard stood just 3 blocks from Ethan's office, right along the route he took to meet clients. There was no way he could miss it. Meanwhile, life in Brooklyn kept moving in its familiar, unpolished rhythm. The woman downstairs kept burning incense that smelled like sandalwood and cinnamon. The teenage boy next door practiced guitar loudly, always messing up the same chord. These sounds and smells anchored Lila to the life she had built for herself, separate from Ethan's polished, performative world. But the city's other side, the world Julian inhabited, was starting to seep in. She met with the foundation's PR team to finalize the billboard copy, and they treated her with a level of respect she wasn't used to. They didn't talk down to her, didn't question whether she fit the image they wanted to project. They just asked her what she wanted people to feel when they saw it. "Hope," she'd said without hesitation. "I want them to see that you can be hurt and still stand tall." That night, Julian invited her to view the printing tests for the billboard at a studio in Midtown. It was surreal. Her face, her growing belly, blown up to a scale that made her step back. She half expected to feel exposed, maybe even embarrassed. Instead, she felt solid. Julian noticed. "You don't flinch when you look at yourself," he said. "I've had to learn not to," she replied. There was a pause, the kind that didn't need filling. Walking back to the subway, she caught her reflection in a store window. The city lights made her skin look warmer, her eyes steadier. For the first time in months, she didn't look like someone surviving. She looked like someone choosing. 2 days before the launch, rain slicked the streets, and a heavy mist blurred the skyline. Lila stood at her window, watching droplets race down the glass. She thought about how much of her life had been lived in the background, supporting someone else's dreams, keeping her own ambitions quiet. Now, she was about to step into the kind of visibility she'd never sought, but maybe had always deserved. She imagined Ethan's voice, dripping with that practiced arrogance, and the way it would falter when he saw her image above the city. She imagined the questions he wouldn't be able to answer, the conversations he'd have to dodge. The thought made her smile. And somewhere across the river, in a glass-walled office he thought was untouchable, Ethan Bennett was about to watch his controls slip through his fingers. Ethan Bennett had always been good at controlling the room. In college, it was with quick jokes and a confident grin. In business, it was with tailored suits, handshakes that lingered just long enough, and the ability to make people believe he was already successful, even when his bank account said otherwise. When Lila met him, that charisma felt magnetic. But charisma without conscience was just manipulation in a sharper suit. Over the years, she learned that Ethan's charm had layers, each one designed to hide the truth underneath. His company, Bennett Solutions, had started small, consulting for mid-sized firms looking to modernize their branding and online presence. Lila had been his first and most loyal unpaid employee, pouring hours into design work he passed off as part of his team's portfolio. She never cared about the credit then. She thought they were building something together. Success came, but not overnight. Ethan had endured enough failed pitches and sleepless nights to know how to play the long game. And when it finally happened, when a major tech client signed a lucrative retainer, he treated it less like a shared victory and more like the opening act of his solo performance. By then, he had started networking in circles Lila wasn't invited into. At first, he said it was because those events were boring and she wouldn't enjoy them. Later, he stopped explaining at all. The truth, as Lila would discover, was that he liked the way he looked without her beside him. A man alone at a bar seemed available, interesting. A man with a wedding ring, even more so. It was a challenge to certain kinds of people, and Ethan thrived on that attention. That was how Tiffany entered the picture. She was 10 years younger, fresh from a job at a fashion PR firm, and perfectly in tune with the image Ethan wanted to project. Together, they became the kind of couple who curated their lives for social media. Lavish dinners, beach vacations, expensive gifts documented with the precision of a marketing campaign. Privately, Ethan could be cutting. He had a knack for finding the soft spot in someone's confidence and pressing on it just enough to make them question themselves. With Lila, it was always disguised as teasing. "You'd be prettier if you dressed up more," he'd say. Or, you really should think about toning up before the baby comes. Small comments, but over time, they worked like erosion. By the time their marriage ended, Lila barely recognized the woman she'd been when they met. Ethan, however, didn't look back. To him, endings were just marketing opportunities. The divorce became a way to reinvent himself as the eligible CEO, a narrative Tiffany helped polish with endless posts about their fresh start. When the maternity photos appeared, Ethan saw not a moment of vulnerability, but a setup for his brand of humor, mean-spirited, dressed in irony. He didn't expect anyone to defend Lila. In his mind, people liked him too much to take her side. What Ethan didn't know was that the city he thought he owned was about to become the stage for his undoing. Ethan's confidence was not just arrogance, it was calculation. He believed people only remembered the last thing they saw, so he made sure the last thing was always his version of the story. He curated his image meticulously, the sharp navy suits, the watch that cost more than Lila's yearly rent, the way he leaned in during conversations to make people feel chosen. In his mind, perception was reality. If he looked successful, if he acted untouchable, then he was. And for years, that illusion worked. Clients loved him, investors trusted him, and acquaintances envied him. He believed the rules didn't apply to him, not in business, not in relationships, and certainly not online. That's why mocking Lila's maternity photos had felt like harmless sport to him. In his eyes, she was no longer part of his story. She was a footnote. If she was hurt, that was her problem. At private dinners with friends, he'd make offhand comments about her, always with a smirk. "She's doing the single mom thing now," he'd say, swirling his drink. "Probably painting in some Brooklyn shoebox and thinking it's romantic." Tiffany would laugh, tucking her hand into his arm like she'd just been told the most charming joke. She had no loyalty to Lila. Why would she? In her mind, Lila was the past and she was the upgrade. But Tiffany had her own motives. She enjoyed the attention Ethan's subtle cruelty generated. Every post that hinted at Lila without naming her got engagement, and engagement meant followers. Followers meant invitations, brand deals, and a step up in the world Tiffany had been clawing her way into. Still, not everyone in Ethan's circle found it amusing. His head of PR, Dana, had quietly advised him to take the posts down. "You're playing with fire," she warned. "Public opinion turns fast, especially when there's a pregnancy involved." Ethan brushed her off. "Relax. People know I'm joking. Besides, who's going to side with her? She doesn't have a platform." That was his blind spot, assuming silence meant weakness. Ethan had always equated visibility with power, never understanding that some people wait in the shadows not because they're afraid, but because they're planning. In the days before the billboard, Ethan was riding high. Bennett Solutions had just closed a deal with a major luxury brand. Tiffany was angling for a magazine spread, and the city was buzzing with summer events. He felt untouchable. On the night before the launch, he left a charity dinner early, telling Tiffany he had meetings the next morning. In truth, he wanted to finalize a deal for an office expansion. He passed through Times Square on his way home, glancing up at the screens with idle pride. Advertising was theater, and he considered himself one of its best directors. The irony, of course, was that the largest stage in the city was about to feature him, but not in the way he imagined. Because while Ethan believed he was writing the ending of Lila's story, she had already written the first line of his reckoning. And by tomorrow morning, the man who thought he controlled the narrative would be staring at a 60-foot reminder that he was no longer the author. The sun had barely risen when the first photos hit social media. At 6:12 a.m., a commuter waiting for the light on West 34th Street looked up, saw the massive digital billboard, and instinctively reached for their phone. The post went live with the caption, "Anyone else see this? Gorgeous." Within minutes, it was shared across Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. There she was, Lila, standing in that soft blue dress, one hand resting on her belly, her chin lifted just slightly toward the skyline. Beside her stood Julian Croft, hands in his pockets, posture relaxed but protective. No touch, no intimacy that could be twisted into gossip, just presence. The text was simple: Lila, mother, artist, hope. Beneath it, Community Arts Fund, launching tomorrow. By 7 a.m., hashtags began trending. Lila Bennett, mother artist hope. The billboard. People who had never heard her name were suddenly debating her story over morning coffee. Some praised the elegance of it. Others speculated wildly about Julian's role in her life. "Is this a soft engagement announcement?" one tweet asked. "Or is this the classiest revenge in history?" another replied. Meanwhile, in a sleek glass office just 3 blocks away, Ethan Bennett's day began like any other. He walked into the building with a coffee in one hand, phone in the other, glancing over emails as he waited for the elevator. Then his assistant, nervously fidgeting with her tablet, stepped forward. "You might want to see this." Ethan looked up. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows at the end of the lobby, the billboard loomed in perfect view. For a moment, he didn't register what he was seeing. Then his jaw tightened. The elevator dinged, but he didn't step in. He stood there, eyes locked on the screen as it cycled through its loop. Every 15 seconds, there she was again. Lila, radiant and unshaken, with a man whose very name carried weight in the city's power circles. "Is this some kind of campaign?" he asked, voice low. "Apparently," his assistant said carefully. "It's all over social media." By 8:30 a.m., Ethan's phone was buzzing nonstop. Old acquaintances texted variations of, "Did you see this?" and "Man, that's cold." Tiffany called twice, then sent a message dripping with suspicion. "Care to explain why your ex is on a billboard with Julian Croft?" Ethan didn't reply. He was too busy scrolling through comment threads, each one worse than the last. People weren't laughing with him anymore. They were laughing at him. Meanwhile, across the river in Brooklyn, Layla sat at her kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea. Carla was pacing, phone in hand, narrating the reaction online. "They're calling it the most dignified clapback in history," Carla said. "Lee, you're a phenomenon." Leela smiled faintly. "It's not about him, it's about me and the baby." Still, part of her couldn't help picturing Ethan's face at that exact moment. And somewhere in his corner office, Ethan was already dialing a number, someone he thought could make the whole thing disappear. The call went straight to voicemail. Ethan hung up, muttered a curse, and tried another number. This time, a groggy voice answered, his PR head, Dana. "Get it taken down," he snapped before she could say hello. Dana paused. "You mean the billboard?" "Ethan, that's not ours. We can't just take it down." "Then find out who bought it, and tell them." "Tell them what?" Her tone sharpened. "That you're embarrassed? That your ex-wife is doing something positive with one of the most respected philanthropists in the city? You'll look worse if you touch it." Ethan's grip tightened around his phone. "I don't care how it looks. This is public," Dana cut in. "And the public is eating it up. Half the comments are praising you for letting her go so she could shine. The other half, well, they're calling you a fool. You can't win this one by fighting it." Ethan ended the call without replying. In the reflection of his office window, he saw the billboard again, towering over the morning traffic. Every time it reappeared, it was like a silent accusation. Lila wasn't pleading for sympathy. She wasn't even acknowledging him. She was simply there, visible, unbothered. And somehow that was worse than any public attack could have been. Tiffany arrived at the office around 10 a.m., storming in with sunglasses still on. "So, when were you planning to tell me that your ex is now, whatever she is, with Julian Croft?" "She's not with him," Ethan said flatly. "Then why does it look like she is?" "Because, babe, the entire internet thinks she just traded up in the biggest way possible." Tiffany crossed her arms. "And honestly, they're not wrong." The jab landed harder than she probably intended. Ethan didn't answer. Tiffany muttered something about a lunch reservation and left, heels clicking like punctuation marks across the floor. By noon, news outlets had picked up the story. Some framed it as an inspiring partnership for the arts. Others leaned into the gossip, pairing Lila's serene image with headlines like, "From Divorce to Billboard Queen." Ethan's inbox was a mess of media requests he had no intention of answering. In Brooklyn, Lila was already at the hospital for a meeting with the foundation team. She passed the mural she'd painted years ago, running her hand lightly over the colors. It felt like a full-circle moment. Her art, her story, her name now tied to something bigger than the heartbreak that had once defined her. Julian met her in the lobby, offering a small smile. "You've seen the coverage?" "I've seen enough," Lila said. "They'll keep talking for a while," Julian said. "Then something else will take the spotlight. That's how the city works." "I'm fine with that," she replied. I didn't do this to stay in the spotlight. I did it so he knows I'm not hiding. Julian nodded. Then I'd say it worked. As they walked into the meeting room, Lila's phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Carla or her mother. It was Ethan. She let it ring out, the screen glowing with his name before fading to black. But deep down, she knew. This wasn't over. If Ethan couldn't control the narrative in public, he might just try to break her in private. For the first 2 days, Lila managed to ignore Ethan's calls. She kept her phone on silent, poured her energy into the foundation meetings, and let Carla screen anything that looked suspicious. But by the third morning, he switched tactics. The first email arrived at 7:14 a.m. Short, cutting. You're making a fool of yourself. Take it down. The second came an hour later. You think Croft actually cares? He's using you for good PR. By noon, there were 6 more. Each one chipped at the edges of her calm, not because she believed him, but because she recognized the voice behind the words. This was the same Ethan who once convinced her she wasn't ready for an art exhibition. The same Ethan who had a way of making her question her own motives until she backed down. That night, she lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The glow from the streetlight outside cast a pale stripe across the wall. She wanted to believe the worst was behind her, that the billboard had been the high point of her public stand. But doubt seeped in quietly, like water under a door. What if Ethan found a way to twist this? What if the public turned on her? She'd seen how fast online sentiment could shift, how one misleading headline could rewrite the truth in hours. Carla noticed the change. You're not eating, she said, sliding a bowl of soup across the table the next afternoon. What's going on in that head of yours? Lila hesitated. It's like I've spent so much time reacting to him, even now. I put up that billboard to move on, but it still feels like I'm letting him take up space in my life. Carla leaned forward. Lee, listen to me. You didn't do this for him. You did it for you, and that baby. Don't let him trick you into thinking otherwise. But the pressure didn't stop. That evening, a gossip blog ran a piece suggesting Julian and Lila were in a strategic romance to boost the Arts Fund's visibility. The comments were ugly. Strangers dissected her motives, her looks, even her worthiness as a mother. Lila didn't cry, but the words sat heavy in her chest. She closed her laptop and walked to the window, watching the blur of headlights below. The city she had once drawn inspiration from now felt like it was pressing in on her, each building a silent witness to her unraveling. She told herself she'd sleep it off, but at 2 a.m. she was still awake, scrolling through her own name on social media. And that's when she saw the new post. Ethan, grinning with Tiffany at a charity gala, holding a sign that read, "No hard feelings." The photo was infuriating in its smugness. Ethan's arm draped over Tiffany's shoulder, the sign angled just enough for the cameras to catch it. The caption beneath read, "Wishing everyone the best in love and life." It wasn't subtle, it was bait, an invitation for the public to see him as the bigger person, the one who had moved on with grace. And judging by the comments, it was working. Some people congratulated him. Others compared the two women, reducing Lila and Tiffany to bullet points in a competition neither had agreed to enter. Lila closed the app and set her phone down with more force than necessary. She walked into the kitchen, filled a glass of water, and tried to drink away the lump in her throat. But the words from those comments followed her like shadows. The next morning, she skipped breakfast. By mid-afternoon, Carla found her in the studio, sitting on the floor beside the easel, paintbrush dry in her hand. "This isn't you," Carla said quietly. "I'm tired, Car," Lila replied. "It's like, no matter what I do, he finds a way to make it about him, and now I feel like I'm back at the start, trying to prove something to someone who will never see it." Carla knelt beside her. "Then stop proving it to him. Prove it to yourself. You survived worse than this." But surviving didn't feel like enough anymore. That night, Lila dreamed she was standing in the middle of Times Square, her billboard gone, replaced by Ethan's smirking face. The crowd around her was laughing, pointing, their voices a blur. She woke up with her heart racing and the taste of panic in her mouth. She needed air. Throwing on a coat, she walked the streets aimlessly until she found herself on the riverfront. The skyline glowed in the distance, the same skyline she'd faced in her maternity shoot. Only now it felt cold. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number lit up the screen. "Meet me tomorrow. I think you should know something about Ethan." For a moment she considered deleting it. Another trap, another drama she didn't have the strength for. But the message was signed with a name she hadn't seen in years. Clara Vaughn. Clara had once been Ethan's business partner before they'd had a falling out. Lila didn't know the details, only that Clara had vanished from the company just before its biggest contract. If she was reaching out now, it meant something. Lila stood there in the wind, the city humming behind her, the water churning below. She felt the faint kick of the baby, like a reminder that she wasn't in this alone. She looked back at the message, her mind already turning. If Clara had a reason to contact her now, maybe it wasn't just about sympathy. Maybe there was something Ethan had kept hidden, something that could change everything. And for the first time in days, Lila felt a spark of something she'd almost lost. The will to fight. The cafe was nearly empty when Lila arrived the next morning. It was one of those small, midtown places with worn leather booths and the constant hiss of the espresso machine. She chose a seat near the back, where she could watch the door without being obvious. Clara Vaughn walked in exactly on time. She looked older than Lila remembered, but not in a tired way. More like someone who had shed weight she never needed to carry. Her hair was pulled back, and her eyes were sharp. "Lila," she said, sliding into the booth. "You look stronger than I expected." "I'm not sure that's true," Lila replied, "but thank you." They ordered coffee, and Clara didn't waste time. "I'm not here to gossip. What Ethan's been doing to you is disgusting, but it's not surprising. I came because I think you should know why I left Bennett Solutions." Lila leaned in, her fingers tightening around her cup. Clara's voice was steady. "Ethan didn't build that company alone. He didn't even build it honestly. The contract that put him on the map, the one with Starkwell Tech, was secured because I brought in the lead. I negotiated it, managed the team, and got it signed. Ethan found a way to push me out right after." "How?" Lila asked. "He planted documents in my email making it look like I'd leaked client data. It wasn't true, but in our industry, just the accusation is enough. I could have fought it, but I didn't have the stomach for a legal war. So I walked away." Lila felt her chest tighten. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I have proof," Clara said, pulling a slim folder from her bag. "And because I've been watching what he's doing to you. When I saw that billboard, I knew he'd try to destroy you in private since he couldn't do it in public. This," she tapped the folder, "is enough to dismantle the image he's built. If you use it right, he'll have more to worry about than making you miserable." Lila hesitated. She thought about the baby, about how much she wanted to keep her life free from more public spectacle. But she also thought about every time Ethan had taken something from her. Her work, her confidence, her voice. "What's in there?" she asked quietly. "Emails, financial records, and," Clara's mouth curved slightly, "a signed statement from a former assistant who helped Ethan alter those documents. She's willing to testify if it comes to that." Lila's mind spun. This wasn't just dirt, it was the kind of truth that could ruin Ethan's professional reputation permanently. "Why not go public yourself?" she asked. Clara shrugged. "Because it's not my fight anymore. But it's still yours." And as Lila stared at the folder between them, she realized the power she'd been missing might have just landed in her hands. Lila didn't touch the folder right away. It sat between them like a live wire, humming with the possibility of change. Part of her wanted to shove it back toward Clara, to walk away before she crossed a line she couldn't uncross. But another part, quieter, stronger, knew she'd already crossed it the moment she agreed to meet. Clara sipped her coffee, watching her carefully. "You're thinking about the baby," she said. "I'm thinking about whether this makes me any different from him," Lila replied. "It does," Clara said firmly. "He uses lies. You'd be using the truth." The words settled in Lila's chest like a weight she could carry. She opened the folder. Inside were printed emails, bank statements, and a series of internal memos stamped confidential. One email thread caught her eye, Ethan instructing someone to clean up the metadata on certain documents before forwarding them to Starkwell's legal team. "That's his handwriting on the margin," Clara said, pointing. "The assistant who signed the statement, her name's Marcy. She'll swear she saw him do it." Lila traced the ink with her finger. It was almost surreal, seeing physical proof of the kind of man Ethan really was. She'd felt it for years, but feeling and proving were two different worlds. "What do you want me to do with this?" she asked. "Whatever you think is right," Clara said. "If it were me, I'd make sure it ends his ability to hurt anyone else. But that choice is yours." They talked for another hour, going over timelines and details. Clara warned her that if she moved forward, Ethan would fight back hard. Lawsuits, smear campaigns, anything to make her regret it. Lila walked out of the cafe with the folder tucked under her arm, the weight of it strangely steadying her steps. She took the long way home, cutting through the park where kids chased each other under the last orange light of the afternoon. When she got home, she set the folder on her desk and stared at it for a long time. She thought about the billboard, how it had given her back some control, how it had forced Ethan to see her as more than a shadow of his past. This was different. This wasn't just a message. This was a weapon. Carla stopped by that evening and Lila showed her the folder. Carla's eyebrows shot up. "This is huge. If this gets out, he's done." "I know," Lila said. "Are you going to use it?" Lila didn't answer right away. She looked out the window at the glow of the city, her hand resting unconsciously on her belly. "If I do, it's not going to be just about revenge. It's going to be about making sure he never does this to anyone else." Carla nodded slowly. "Then maybe it's time you stop playing defense." Lila closed the folder, her decision forming like a slow sunrise. Because the next move she made wouldn't just protect her. It would flip Ethan's entire world upside down. The next morning, Lila woke up with a clarity she hadn't felt in months. The fear that had shadowed her since the billboard went up was still there, but it no longer controlled her. She knew what she had to do. This time, on her own terms. Her first step wasn't to call a lawyer. It was to call Julian. They met at the foundation's office, sunlight pouring in through the tall windows. He listened without interrupting as she laid out everything Clara had told her, the folder sitting between them like a shared secret. When she finished, Julian leaned back in his chair. "That's a loaded gun, Lila. Once you pull the trigger, there's no going back." "I know," she said, "but I'm done letting him set the rules. I want this to end." Julian studied her face for a long moment before nodding. "Then let's make sure you win on all fronts. Not just legally, but publicly. If this gets messy, you need your story out there first." They spent the next hour mapping out a plan. Step 1. Secure the evidence. Julian's legal team would verify the documents and lock them away. Step 2. Prepare a public narrative. Not a smear, but a clear, factual account of what happened to Clara and how Ethan's actions fit into a pattern. Step 3. Tie it to something bigger than personal revenge. A push for stronger ethics standards in their industry. By the time she left the meeting, Lila felt like she was walking taller. She stopped by her apartment only long enough to change before heading to a salon in Soho. It wasn't vanity, it was strategy. A new haircut, subtle makeup, and a fitted navy blazer transformed her from the quiet artist Ethan used to dismiss into someone ready to sit across from a news anchor and speak with authority. Carla met her afterward for lunch. "Wow," Carla said, eyes wide. "You look like you're about to run for office." "Not office," Lila replied, smiling for the first time in days. "Just my life." That afternoon, she filmed a short, polished video statement in the foundation's media room. No tears, no bitterness, just a calm explanation that she would soon be speaking about issues of integrity and fairness in business. She didn't mention Ethan's name, but anyone paying attention would connect the dots. The video went live on the foundation's page that evening. By midnight, it had been shared over 200,000 times. Comments poured in from women who'd faced similar betrayals, thanking her for speaking up. Somewhere across the city, Ethan saw it too. But this time, there was nothing he could mock without looking small. And for the first time, Lila realized she wasn't just surviving him anymore. She was outgrowing him. The days that followed felt different. Lila no longer avoided her reflection in shop windows or hesitated when stepping into a crowded room. She walked with purpose, her phone buzzing constantly, not with Ethan's harassment, but with interview requests, invitations to speak at women's business panels, and messages of support from strangers across the country. Julian's team worked quietly in the background, verifying every document Clara had given her. The legal review came back solid. The evidence was authentic, damning, and impossible for Ethan to explain away without implicating himself further. Still, Lila didn't rush. She knew the timing had to be perfect. Releasing the truth too soon could let him spin it as a personal vendetta. Waiting until the right moment meant the narrative would be hers, and hers alone. Carla was with her nearly every day, helping sort through messages and plan her schedule. "You're different," she said one evening as they sorted through a stack of speaking engagement requests. "I feel different," Lila admitted. "For the first time, I'm not reacting to him. I'm building something of my own." One afternoon, she visited the mural at the hospital again. A group of children in art smocks were painting nearby as part of a workshop. One little girl with paint on her cheeks asked, "Are you the lady on the big sign?" Lila laughed softly. "I guess I am." "Are you famous?" the girl asked. "No," Lila said, kneeling down to the child's level. "But I am someone who didn't give up when people were mean to me, and you can be that too." The moment stayed with her. It reminded her why she was doing this, not just to win against Ethan, but to stand as proof that women could reclaim their dignity and rewrite their stories. By the end of the week, the plan was set. Julian would host a charity gala for the Arts Fund, with key media outlets invited. Lila would speak briefly about the program, and then, without fanfare, the evidence folder would be handed to a trusted investigative journalist. It wasn't about spectacle, it was about precision. The night before the gala, Lila sat at her desk, looking at the folder one last time. It no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a key, one that could lock Ethan out of her life for good. She placed it in her bag and turned off the light. Because tomorrow night, in a room full of the city's most powerful eyes, Ethan Bennett's perfect facade would crack, and she would be the one holding the hammer. The night of the gala shimmered with the kind of opulence only New York could stage. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over the grand ballroom, the air alive with the soft hum of conversation and the clink of champagne glasses. Guests arrived in tuxedos and gowns, drifting between art displays and silent auction tables. Lila stepped out of the car with Julian at her side, the cameras flashing instantly. She wore a sleek black gown, her hair swept up to reveal the simple diamond studs her mother had given her years ago. She didn't need anything more. The confidence in her posture was the most striking accessory of all. Inside, the program unfolded smoothly. Opening remarks, a brief musical performance, and an art showcase from the hospital's children's program. Lila's speech was scheduled near the midpoint, just before the live auction. When Julian introduced her, the room quieted. Lila walked to the podium, her heart steady despite the hundreds of eyes watching. "Good evening," she began, her voice calm but clear. "When I first picked up a paintbrush, I never imagined it would lead me here, to a room filled with people who believe art can change lives. This program isn't just about creativity. It's about dignity. It's about giving voices to those who have been silenced." She paused, letting the words settle. "I know what it means to be silenced, and I know what it takes to speak again." She didn't mention Ethan by name, but the weight of her words was unmistakable. Cameras from 2 news outlets were trained on her, recording every syllable. When she finished, the applause rose like a tide. Julian stepped forward to thank her, then smoothly transitioned to introducing the evening's special press partners. In the controlled chaos that followed, the evidence folder passed quietly from Lila's bag to the hands of investigative journalist Mara Green, known for her integrity and unwillingness to bow to pressure. Mara met Lila's gaze for a brief moment, a silent promise exchanged between them. Then she slipped the folder into her case and disappeared into the crowd. Across town, Ethan was at another event, blissfully unaware. He declined the gala invitation, claiming a scheduling conflict. In truth, he didn't want to share a room with Lila and Julian. That choice would cost him. By the time the live auction began, Lila's phone buzzed with a single text from Mara. "It's starting." She slipped the phone back into her clutch and turned her attention to the stage, her expression serene. Because while the ballroom sparkled with champagne and applause, the first draft of Ethan Bennett's public downfall was already being written. The story broke just after 9 p.m. While the gala guests were bidding on a signed painting, notifications began lighting up phones around the room. Mara Green's article had gone live on the front page of the Metropolitan Ledger. Exclusive. Documents reveal Bennett Solutions secured landmark contract through fraudulent means. The headline was followed by scanned images of Ethan's annotated instructions to alter files, testimony from Marcy, and a detailed timeline of Clara Vaughn's forced exit. It was methodical, damning, and impossible to spin as a misunderstanding. Within minutes, other outlets picked it up. Hashtags began trending. Bennett exposed, truth over power. Some posts paired the article with photos of Lila at the gala that very night, calling it the quietest, sharpest revenge in history. Julian was mid-conversation when his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, then at Lila, his brow lifting just slightly. "It's out," he murmured. Across the city, Ethan was at a rooftop mixer when the first message hit his inbox. Then another. And another. Someone shoved a phone in his face, the glaring headline staring back at him. "What is this?" he barked. "Looks like someone finally caught up to you," the man replied before walking away. Ethan's pulse spiked. He excused himself, stepping into the hallway to call Dana, but she didn't answer. The second attempt went to voicemail. His mind spun through possibilities, scrambling for damage control. By 10 p.m., the story had snowballed. 3 clients issued statements suspending their contracts with Bennett Solutions pending investigation. The company's stock, which had been riding high on recent deals, began to dip in after-hours trading. At the gala, Lila remained composed, even as whispers about the breaking news spread among guests. She didn't gloat. She didn't even bring it up. She posed for photos with donors, complimented the artwork on display, and made sure the evening stayed centered on the arts program. Carla approached her during dessert, her grin barely contained. "Have you seen the numbers? The article's already been read 500,000 times. He's done, Lee." Lila's gaze softened. "Maybe. But this isn't about watching him fall. It's about closing the door for good." She stayed until the final toast, then quietly slipped away. Outside, the summer air was warm, the city buzzing with its usual nighttime pulse. Julian's car was waiting, but Lila paused at the edge of the curb, taking in the hum of traffic, the glow of lights. Her phone buzzed again, this time an unknown number. She opened the message. It was from Marcy, the former assistant. "He's already calling around, trying to find someone to blame, but I told the truth. I'm not scared anymore. Thank you." Lila smiled faintly, slipping the phone back into her clutch. Because no matter what Ethan tried next, the truth was already out, and the story now belonged to her. The fallout from the exposé didn't take long. By the end of the week, Ethan Bennett had stepped down as CEO of Bennett Solutions, citing personal reasons. The company's board released a statement promising a full review of all past contracts. In quieter corners of the city, rumors swirled that more evidence might surface, though no one said Lila's name aloud. She didn't need the credit. The satisfaction wasn't in people knowing she had been the one to hand over the truth. It was in knowing she had stopped him from hurting anyone else the way he'd hurt Clara, or her. Life didn't suddenly become a fairy tale. She still had bills to pay, doctor's appointments to keep, and the slow, steady reality of preparing for motherhood on her own. But something in her had shifted. The weight that had lived on her chest for months was gone, replaced by a quiet sense of space to breathe, to create, to decide what she wanted next. The arts program at the hospital became her anchor. Twice a week, she led workshops for children recovering from long-term treatments. Watching them mix colors and tell stories through their drawings reminded her of why she'd started painting in the first place. It wasn't for galleries or recognition. It was for connection. Julian checked in often, sometimes stopping by the studio with coffee, other times just sending a quick text to ask how she was feeling. There was no pretense between them, no pressure. Whatever their relationship might become, it was rooted in mutual respect. One afternoon, as summer turned to early fall, Carla convinced Lila to take a walk through Central Park. The leaves had begun to change, splashes of gold and red filtering the sunlight. They found a bench overlooking the lake, and for a while, they just watched the rowboats drift by. "You know," Carla said, "you could have kept that folder closed. You could have ignored Clara's call, stayed quiet, but you didn't. You didn't just save yourself. You changed the game for everyone who's ever been in your shoes. Lila smiled, resting a hand on her belly. I didn't want my child growing up thinking silence is the safest choice. I want them to know that truth matters, even when it costs something. Carla nudged her shoulder. You know you're kind of a hero, right? I'm just done being the background in my own life, Lila said softly. In the distance, the city skyline rose against the fading light, the same skyline that had once felt cold and distant. Now it felt like possibility. And for the first time in a long while, Lila knew the next chapter would be entirely hers to write. Winter arrived quietly in New York, softening the city's edges with pale light and early sunsets. Lila's belly had grown, her movements slower now, but there was a calm about her that no one could miss. She spent mornings in her studio, afternoons at the hospital's art program, and evenings curled up with a book or sketchpad. The billboard had long since been replaced with a new campaign, but people still stopped her sometimes, at the market, on the subway, even in the park, to tell her they remembered it. Some thanked her, others simply smiled, as if they knew. One crisp December afternoon, she stood in front of the mural at the hospital again. It had become something of a ritual, her way of grounding herself before the baby arrived. A little boy in a knit hat ran up, pointing to one of the painted flowers. "Did you make that?" he asked. "I did," she said, kneeling down. "Do you like it?" He nodded solemnly. "It's happy." That single word stayed with her the rest of the day. Happy. Not perfect, not famous, not even strong. Just happy. That was what she wanted for her life moving forward. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of joy, no matter what came. That evening, she invited Carla and Julian over for dinner. They laughed in her warm little kitchen, steam curling from the pot of soup on the stove. It wasn't a gala, a photo shoot, or a headline. It was just life. Real, imperfect, and good. After they left, she stepped onto her balcony with a mug of tea, looking out over the city lights. The air was cold enough to bite, but she didn't mind. Somewhere out there, Ethan was likely trying to rebuild his image, but he no longer had a place in her thoughts. She'd given him enough time already. Her phone buzzed with a notification, an email from a young artist she'd never met. It was a simple message. "I saw your video months ago. I left a toxic job because of it. Thank you." Lila closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of those words. She had fought for herself, yes, but in doing so she had unknowingly lit a path for others. She set down the mug, rested both hands on her belly, and whispered, "We're ready for the next chapter." The city stretched before her, vast and alive. Somewhere, far below, the hum of traffic mixed with distant laughter. And in that moment, she knew this wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of a new one, written entirely on her own terms. Because she had learned the most valuable truth of all. You can't control how others treat you, but you can choose what you build from it. And she had chosen a life she could be proud of. So, here we are, friends. If you're still with me at this point, maybe something in Lila's story touched a part of your own. Maybe you've been through a season where someone tried to write your story for you. Or maybe you're still in it right now. I just want you to remember, your voice matters. Your truth matters, and no matter how much someone tries to take from you, you can still choose what you build from it. If this story spoke to you, let me know in the comments. Share your own chapter, because you never know who might need to hear it. And if you want more stories like this, stories about strength, dignity, and finding your own way, hit that like button, share this with someone you care about, and subscribe so we can keep walking through these journeys together. Because you're not alone here. We're writing these new chapters side by side.